Why Did I Get Married? A Church Girl Story, leaving church and leaving my marriage. So, I'm going to talk about how I grew up in the Black church. There was a lot of emphasis on purity and abstinence and dating toward marriage and those kinds of things. That was a lot of the language that was used in the teaching that I received growing up in church. And it often left me feeling very erotically disempowered. So I want to get into that a little bit more and also talk about my shift from being unhappily married to happily unmarried, right? So I'm Dr. Catherine Sophia Bell, and I did all the things that Black women are told we're supposed to do, right? So as I mentioned, I grew up in the church. I got all the degrees. I got married. I was married for 17 years. I had 4 children. I had it all, and I felt trapped by all of it. So I liberated myself. And so now I'm in a place where I'm living life on my own terms, doing the things that I want to do, focusing on reading, writing, speaking, and coaching, embracing my sensuality and sexuality with lovers, and just doing the things that actually are meaningful for me, right? And not doing the things that are expected of me from other people. So on this channel, I share some of my transformational experiences in an effort to encourage those of you who are watching on your own liberation journeys while also building beloved community. So what I want to talk about today is, I don't know if you've ever watched or heard of the Dear Wifey podcast. So I will say as a disclaimer on the front end, this is not a podcast that I've never watched a full episode of this podcast, but I have seen clips on it on different social media feeds. So there's one particular episode of this Dear Wifey channel, Dear Future Wifey channel, that basically said, well, the title of it is You Won't Believe What Nearly Broke This Pastor's Marriage, Reggie and Kelly Steele. So that's the title of that particular episode of the Dear Future Wifey podcast, right? Again, I'm not endorsing it. It's not a podcast that I've ever watched a full episode of, but you probably have seen at least clips of, because I've seen clips of this particular episode where basically it gives you a taste of some of the really problematic teachings that we get in church, and that women in particular, well, men and women, I think, often get in church, right? So one of the stories she tells is that she knew that he was cheating on her, and she would literally like iron his clothes for him to get ready and go out with other women and be with other women, right? And so I'm not here to judge her. I really just want to point out that I think this is, again, an example of the ways that women and men are socialized in the church, and the narratives around like men being the head and women being submissive, and there's all kinds of things that go into that. And I don't know if this was only church teaching or family of origin stuff or broader social things, but this is something that just stood out to me, and it immediately reminded me of some of the problematic teachings that I received growing up in church and how that contributed to my own experience of getting married really early. So I would like to hear from you guys. Like, one, have you seen it? If you did see it, what your thoughts are about that. And then I want to also invite you to think about times in your own life when you've done something that you look back and you're like, that was really ridiculous. I can't believe I was in a space where I did that thing. Because again, I'm not here to judge what she did. I really do want to hold some compassion for her by also saying, like, this is still some foolishness, and let's not get caught up in that. So, if you ever done something foolish in relationships or in life, just put in the comments real quick, like, yeah, been there, done that, glad I got over it. Because I certainly have, not necessarily that particular thing, but I have done some things in my life that I look back on and see how ridiculous they were. And I'm so glad that I am not where I am. I'm not where I was then now. I'm glad that I have learned to know better and do better. Okay, so let me just break down just when I say I grew up in the Black church, right? So I'm not somebody who went to church just on Easter Sunday and Mother's Day, right? I like really, really grew up in a church, which means that like on Sundays we were going to Sunday school, right? And then we're going to the morning service. And then there would be a break after the morning service so that we would go home, get something to eat, and then we would go back to church for an afternoon service on Sunday, right? So I was in church like all day on Sunday. Then during the week, there were weekly Bible studies. And then there were also sometimes meetings at our house, right? And my mother was an evangelist and then became a minister and eventually became a pastor, like once I was out of the house. So anyway, like when I say I was born and raised, and not born, but raised in the Black church, I mean, like I was really in the thick of being in the Black church. And one of the things that I really remember, and there were some positive things, I'm not going to talk about those positive things now. I really want to talk about some of the challenging things in terms of things that I internalized being in that Black church space. So there was a lot of emphasis on purity teaching. There was a lot of emphasis on abstinence. there was a lot of emphasis on dating toward marriage, right? And so there's all of this teaching around crucifying the flesh, around being in the spirit. Anything involving sensuality or sexuality is sin. Anything involving the flesh is sin, right? And so it's like thinking about sex is sin, having sex, whether it's oral sex or anal sex or vaginal sex, is sin. Even again, thinking about sex is sin. Masturbation is sin, right? It's like almost like what can we do with our bodies other than like sleep and eat and go to the bathroom that was not going to send us directly to hell, right? And so that was the kind of teaching and messaging that I got in church growing up, right? And so because of that kind of teaching, I really grew up with a lot of sense of shame around my body. I grew up with a lot of sense of guilt whenever I explored, even if I wasn't, when I wasn't actually having sex. Just any kind of exploration I did with my body solo or with other people, I always just felt riddled with guilt and shame around it, right? So I felt very erotically disempowered as a child and going into high school and going into college, right? And so I'm curious to hear from you guys, like, did you grow up in similar kind of church environments where you were there all day Sunday and throughout the week? Did you receive similar kind of rigid teachings around purity and abstinence? And what impact did that have on you? How do you think that impacted your relationship to your body, your relationship to your sensuality and sexuality? How did it impact your dating experiences or your relationship experiences or your marriage if you are married, or maybe it impacted you not being married? I'm curious to hear from other folks that were raised in a Black church, right? So again, I'm raised in a church. I went to church a lot, especially like in middle school, in high school. Even when I went off to college, I was born in New Jersey. I went to college in Atlanta, and I still sought out a church because I felt like, I didn't want to go to college and backslide and fall away from the Lord. So I was still doing Bible studies on campus in church. I joined the gospel choir when I was in college. And was going to church on Sundays, right? So I was trying to stay on the straight and narrow path, right? So I met this guy in my first year. We met our freshman year in college, and I went to lunch with him and one of his friends like a couple times, and then I used to go to their dorm room on campus and watch movies and things like that. But we didn't date or anything like that that first year, and we didn't like exchange information to keep in touch over the summer after our freshman year. So sophomore year comes around, and we realized that we both lived off campus, and we realized we both live in the same apartment complex. So we end up reconnecting sophomore year. He comes to my apartment a couple of times. There's one point at which he comes over, and two of my good friends are over there, and we just get to talking about like our future and our lives and what we want to do with our lives. And we're like staying up late, we're talking, we're praying, we're doing all these things. And he left a really positive impression on me because at the time I felt like he had some clarity around like his purpose and what he wanted to do with his life. And that was something that impressed me at that time, right? So that was sophomore year. And then he ended up transferring to another school in another state after sophomore year. So we really didn't keep in touch too much after sophomore year. Like there were a couple of times we were supposed to get together that fell through, but we didn't really keep in touch after the sophomore year. So soon after he went out of town to, transfer, for the summer, and I knew he was transferring and go to another school, I started dating another guy who actually was in the gospel choir that I was in. So, and I should say the first guy that I was talking about was also raised in a church. This new guy that I had met through the choir was raised in a church as well. So I start dating this new guy from the choir, and things get pretty serious for us. And again, I'm raised in a church, so I'm always taught that I'm dating toward marriage. So in my mind, me and this other guy from the choir are dating toward marriage. So we have a relationship over those 2 years. Then my senior year, spring semester of my senior year, I'd already gotten accepted into the graduate program, into the PhD program of philosophy at the University of Memphis. And, I'm kind of getting ready to, just getting things in order. I'm sorting through old papers and getting ready to pack up my things to just get ready for, the summer and get ready for the move. And so as I'm sorting through these old papers, I end up coming across the phone number of the guy that I had met my freshman year who transferred. So I give the number a call, I leave a message, and he ends up sending me an email. And this is like, again, the end of the spring semester, almost going into summer of my senior year. And he's basically like, Yeah, we're gonna be together and you're gonna be my wife is the gist of what he says in the email. And so I reply like, well, actually, I'm seeing somebody else. I have intentions of marrying this person that I'm seeing. We've been together for the last 2 years. And so he's like, okay, fine, I can accept that. But we exchange numbers and we have a couple of conversations over the summer, just catching up on stuff that had happened over the previous 2 years. So that summer, my college sweetheart, the one I had been with those the second 2 years of me being in college, he helps me to move to Memphis, and then he goes back to Atlanta because he still has to finish out his senior year in college. And soon after that, the college sweetheart tells me basically, and this is like the most quintessential 1990s kind of breakup experience. We're on America Online, so holler at me in the comments if you remember America Online and the chat rooms in America Online. So we were able to avoid paying long distance by chatting on America Online. So we're chatting on AOL. And he basically says like, I don't think we're meant to be together. We're very different. I don't think we're soulmates. So he ends the relationship. So initially I'm kind of resistant to it. And then I just accept, like, if he wants to end the relationship, I accept that he wants to end the relationship. And now in hindsight, what I should have done was just kind of pause and sat with that and be with the emotions of that. But what I actually did was like immediately call the other guy who had already been emailing me about like, we're going to be together and you're going to be my wife. So I call the other guy and I say, do you think we're meant to be together? Do you really believe that we're soulmates? And he answers in the affirmative. And so I know, I was going to say I think, but I know it was something that I wanted and needed to hear in the aftermath of the disappointment of the college sweetheart ending the relationship, right? So again, this is like late summer of once I have gone to grad school to Memphis. So new guy, not new guy in the sense of like not the college sweetheart, but the person I'd met my freshman year, he decides to come and visit me in Memphis, right? And so I tell him like I don't have any furniture. So, I mean, I had like a bed, but I didn't have any living room furniture or a couch or anything. But I said I think I had a Papa sign from like Pier 1. So I said, you're gonna have to sleep on the floor, which he did. But he came, he spent the weekend, interacted with the philosophy department at different events. And so he was very comfortable in that environment. I remember my impression was that, he was not intimidated by me. He was not intimidated by my aspirations or my goals or, the kind of environment that I was in the academy, right? So things kind of progressed from there where we're now either talking, like we're communicating almost daily, right? Either we're talking or we're emailing or we're chatting. And there are, long letters and poems, it's all very romantic, right? And so during my fall break, I go and visit him at his parents' house. Again, he lives in another state. So I go to visit him at his parents' house, and we have, I have an experience with him that is erotically empowering. So he pressures me to do something that I do not want to do. I reluctantly but resentfully do it. And then I just kind of put it in a box, like, pretend it does not happen, go back to Memphis as if it didn't happen, right? So then he's supposed to come to Memphis during the Thanksgiving break, but his family does not want him to be away from the family for that holiday. So again, I end up going back to stay at his parents' house for the Thanksgiving break. And of course, we're staying in separate rooms because his parents are very church oriented as well, and they were not trying to have us stay in a room together in their Christian household under their Christian roof, right? So we're staying in separate rooms, but late into the night, he comes into my room, and I have another erotically disempowering experience that was not consensual, right? And so, I didn't fight, I didn't yell, I didn't flee, I froze, and again I sucked it up and put it in a box and pretended it didn't happen. So I went through the rest of the weekend as if nothing happened. Again, I went back to Memphis, and I realized that I had been telling all of my friends what a wonderful person he was, and he was a man of God, and we were ordained to be together, and we were going to get married. And I really didn't have, like, I couldn't process my perception of him ahead of those experiences with those actual experiences, right? I couldn't reconcile who I thought him to be with those particular experiences that I had. And I didn't know how to tell people what happened, right? So again, I just kind of sucked it up, and pushed it down. And so the plan had been for him to, he still had another semester in undergrad. So the plan had been for him to finish up his undergrad and then move to Memphis. And in the aftermath of these experiences, as ridiculous as it sounds, this is why I'm like, I have a place of compassion for the woman in this video, right? Because as ridiculous as it sounds, I felt obligated to marry him after what happened, right? Now, if I could, in my current state, go back to my 21-year-old self and help her feel more empowered to make different decisions, I wish that I could do that. But at 21 years old, being raised in a church with all of the church teachings that I got, I just wasn't in a place to, I just felt obligated. So we decide to, and again, so he's going to move to Memphis, and I don't want to be fornicating, and I don't want to be shacking up. So I'm like, we need to get married before he moves to Memphis. So we end up getting married in December on New Year's Eve at his grandparents' house. None of my family was there, so his family was all there. None of my family was there, and I should know. My mother gave me the option of, she said, well, I can either fly there with you for the wedding, or I can give you the money for the dress, right? And so I opted for her to give me the money for the dress that I wanted, which was not even a wedding dress, which was not white. But anyway, so I get married at his grandparents' house. We get married at his grandparents' house, and he ends up moving to Memphis. And again, it was like all the other two incidents that I had with him, non-consensual, erotically disempowering experiences, I just shut down, and I tried to redeem myself through the marriage, right? And so I was in that marriage for 17 years. It would take me 17 years before I was able to extract myself from that marriage. I had 4 children in the context of that marriage. And while I won't put all the blame on the church, I know that for me, again, the guilt that I felt, the shame that I felt, all of the teachings that I received growing up, again, around purity and abstinence and hell and fire and damnation, and it's better to marry than to burn, and all of this kind of stuff, those were certainly major contributing factors in my decision to get married rather than make other choices at that point, right? And so, now I'm in a place where I was unhappily married for 17 years. I felt very erotically disempowered in the context of that marriage, in large part because of what happened before we got married. But I was unhappily married for 17 years, and I've been happily unmarried for the last 7 going on 8 years. And I can say, like, the power and joy and pleasure that I have experienced on the other side of that marriage, getting happily unmarried and delightfully divorced and being erotically empowered, has been a very awesome transformation for me, right? And so one of the reasons why I always introduce myself as Dr. Catherine Sophia Bell, who is happily unmarried, delightfully divorced, and erotically empowered, is because I fought really hard to get to those places of being happily unmarried, delightfully divorced, and erotically empowered. And I know what it feels like to be unhappily married, and I know what it feels like to feel erotically disempowered. And so my work is with Black women, women of color, who want to go from happily unmarried from unhappily married to happily unmarried and delightfully divorced, who want to go from feeling erotically disempowered to feeling erotically empowered. So I am going to share some resources in the description of this video. I will say that this is feeling a little heavy for me, but I want to share it, and I wanted to share this part of it, which is the heavier part, because the other parts, like the post-divorce journey, is much lighter, is much more jovial, is much more pleasure-centered, is much more freeing, right? And so because I've done that hard work of going from unhappily married to happily unmarried, from erotically disempowered to erotically empowered, through coaching, through counseling, through all kinds of magic and manifestation, right? Like I get a lot of my sense of connection in the work that I want to do in the world, not just my job, but literally like the work that I feel called to do in the world, is around supporting Black women and women of color become happily unmarried and delightfully divorced and erotically empowered. So the next video that I'm going to be posting in this Happily Unmarried series is Provider, where job and financial insecurity in my marriage, right? And again, this is also connected to the church teaching where it's like, okay, the man is supposed to be the provider and the head of the household, and a lot of the time that is not actually the case. And in what ways are Black women expected to fill in the gaps where they're expected to treat the man as if he's the provider and the head when they are the ones who are actually being the provider, in addition to doing all the care work and domestic labor and childcare and all of those other kinds of things. So I'm going to get into that in my next video. So thank you for joining me and for listening. Please make sure that you subscribe and like and share and comment. And again, the next video I'm going to focus on provider wear, job and financial insecurity in my marriage. Thanks for your time.